Very good. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay, that's very good. Are there any other declarations? If I can now turn to the minutes of the meeting that was held on the excuse me, the 16th of August. Can I sign those as a record? Very good, that's great. Thank you. So we can now move on to the main agenda. I think it might be helpful if I just quickly run through the running order for this evening. In a moment or two, we're going to start with the application at Allen House, then application in Edward Square, the Pier House in Cheney Walk, Ovington Square. We will then move on to Pullman Court, Calfield Gardens, and then Dixon House, Markland House, Whitstable House, and finally Frinstead House. Okay. So I think we can make a start by going to the North Pack, and I think Derek Taylor, you're going to introduce Allen House, yes?
That's correct, Chairman, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just wait for the slides to come up, okay. Right, so the first application this evening involves Allen House, situated in Allen Street, just south of the High Street. Essentially, planning permission is being sought for the erection of a mansard roof above the property, which would provide for 2 additional flats in the building. And then there'd be partial infilling of light wells and alterations to the elevations. The first slide I'm showing there is an Ordnance survey extract, and you can see there Kensington High Street towards the left of centre in the image, and then Allen Street running from left to right, and the site outlined as usual in red. The second slide there is an aerial shot, which I think is very useful. It shows the prominence and the function of Allen House, which really is one of the sort of most prominent buildings in Allen Street, and I think it's one of the key contributors to the character of the conservation area. You can see it's a large block. It sort of is much larger than the surrounding development. On the right of the photograph, you can see Windstay Mansions, and then Allen House identified by its red outline in the centre left of the image. And then from Allen Street, that's really where you see the imposing and characterful front elevation. And it's worth noting in that photograph, just keep your eye on the future ones, on the large gable in the centre and then the roof form, because most of the development takes place behind those, quite some distance behind those, and there would be no change at all to any of the key features on the front elevation. So in the view that you have there in the photograph, that view wouldn't change in the proposals. That's just a plan of the existing ground floor. It's useful in that one just to point out that the block is in a sort of slightly extended L shape. So on the eastern side, there's a big cutback in the block that obviously provides for windows around that area. And then the Allen Street frontage in that slide is down at the bottom. And that's a south-facing elevation to show the extent of demolition that's proposed. You'll have seen from the history in the reports that obviously there have been previous permissions here involving much more extensive demolition, but happily that's no longer the case. So the amount of demolition is now relatively minor, as you can see there in the slide. All the demolition is identified in the red hatching. And then looking sort of roughly northwards from Allen Street, if you look at the top, the blue outline that hopefully you can see from your seats there, the blue outline shows the proposed outline for the building. So you can see that the chimney stack, for example, would be raised. And then that image there is a montage showing the building in its proposed form. So that's the existing, just showing the outline, and then that's the proposed. So important to note that the main gable and the other features in the front don't alter at all. The chimney would be raised, but raised in a manner that's completely in keeping with its existing appearance. And then in that perspective, you don't really see the mansard behind, because it's sort of more central to the building. That's the west elevation as existing and the west elevation as proposed. So the extra bulk that you see there at roof level is more central to the building, and you wouldn't see it from the street. And then the existing south elevation and the proposed south elevation. So you can see there the mansard now at the upper level, but tucked well behind all the features at the front. And then now you can see the balconies that would be proposed within the L shape at the rear. And then the east elevation as existing and the east elevation as proposed. So that's the elevation as would be seen from Eden Close on the eastern side. And then sort of staying with Eden Close, on the left is the proposed rear elevation, which in this angle essentially doesn't really change. You can see the existing building obviously in its stock brick. On the right, just for comparison, is the last planning permission, which involved much more extensive demolition. And you can see there the original rear elevation obviously replaced now with a modern elevation. So just for comparison, that was the last scheme, and on the left is what's now proposed. And then just more images of the balconies sort of tucked into the inside of the L. On the top left of that, in the green, you can see the part of the building where the balconies would be positioned. And then that's looking upwards to where the balconies would be. And then obviously on the top right, you can see the balconies, and it's slotted into the L. And then just the existing roof plan that's showing all the features at the front of the building towards the bottom. And then the proposed roof plan. I don't know if you can see it on the big slides, but where I'm running the cursor, that's actually the footprints of the previous permission. So you can see, in fact, it's much less extensive now in this version. And that's the last slide.
Good, thank you very much. Now, nobody's registered to speak for this application as an objector, so we move straight on to questions that we have, colleagues for offices. Who'd like to go first, or shall I start? Okay, I've just got a couple of points. First of all, I know there has been some discussion about the area that is created, and magically, I think this seems to be 649 square meters. But I am assuming, Mr. Taylor, that these things are set out very clearly. You know, there are RICS or whatever. There are completely standard methodologies. We're happy with the calculations that have been put in front of us.
We are happy with the calculations. Obviously, that question has been raised in representations.
Yeah, exactly.
And the applicants are well aware of that, so we have discussed that with the applicants. Okay. And clearly, we've carried out our own sort of assessment of it as well. And that, as far as I can see, that's a completely accurate
I'm going to just, before I move on to a couple of points about proposed conditions, I don't know, Sam or Eva, would you like to come in and ask anything? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. I couldn't see anywhere in your drawings, like floor by floor, fire route exits, because you're adding extra floor, which is higher up. So do you have like a proper plan?
Well, yes. I mean, there are full plans. I haven't included plans for every floor in the building, but obviously the mansard, which would be at the top of the building, is accessed completely internally.
I'm sorry, I'm still not clear, because if you're adding extra, and obviously you're creating units there, and you have a lift. So if fire starts somewhere on a second or first floor, how people who are, let's say, high up, whatever you created, are able to escape? This is what I wanted to see, and I haven't seen it. I look through objections, and obviously there are some concern about plans being not really visible through our Royal Borkington of Chelsea planning website. Obviously, some plans I looked myself are exceeding what you say, 649. So I am really concerned about fire routes.
Well, I mean, obviously fire risk is an important consideration. I mean, it's been the subject of a lot of assessment in this case, including through our own building control officers. So as far as planning can go, I mean, I think that the building has been properly researched in terms of fire risk and fire escape.
Yes, just a quick question regarding the sill payment that is probably due. I couldn't see. I was just checking in the report. Sometimes we mention what that would be. Do we have any figure from the applicant?
I do. The sill payment for this would be 357,000 for the local authority sill, and then a further 52,000 for the mayoral sill.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I mean, I think those figures, although substantial, they kind of emphasise this is really extending an existing building, which is also being refurbished, obviously. So the actual degree of extra floor space created is actually relatively modest in the context of the building.
That's correct, yeah.
Yes. Perhaps I can move on to a couple of things that I have. These relate to proposed conditions, actually. The first is condition 8, relating to sustainable drainage. As I understand it, there's no basement construction, that there isn't any new land being built over at all in this case. I mean, it seems slightly strange that we should want to impose a condition of this sort when in effect the development doesn't really include anything relevant.
Well, I mean, the new policy CE2 is quite a progressive policy. I mean, it's seeking to achieve a 50% reduction in the runoff from any site. Now, if a development was obviously building over part of a garden or building over open land, that would be clearly a more serious situation. But the policy actually applies to all developments. In a case like this, I mean, obviously there's extensive work at roof level, so that there is opportunity to look at various aspects of drainage from the roof. And the whole purpose is to slow down the amount of water that's running out into the main system. The policy applies anyway. It may be that just because of the limited works they're doing, they may struggle to achieve 50%. I mean, that can happen. But the policy seeks the 50% and the conditions there to ensure compliance with the policy.
Okay, all right. I'm not particularly convinced, but I'll leave that. And I won't ask my colleagues if they agree with that train of thought. The other aspect, which I think is, to my mind, more clear-cut, is these contamination conditions. I mean, Allen House has been around for quite a long time. I think it was built in something like 1902, from memory. I think that it's actually carved in stone on the building somewhere. It strikes me that, again, bearing in mind the development that's proposed in this permission, it seems that elaborate contamination conditions aren't really justified. I think condition 20, if something unexpected, maybe landscaping the garden suddenly came up with something that nobody was expecting, then that's perfectly sensible, that would need to be investigated properly. but I think 17, 18 and 19 seem asking a lot for not a very good reason.
Yeah, well, I think the full suite of contamination conditions has been recommended here by the Environmental Health Officer. I think it's fair to say that the planning test of necessary may not be the same test as the test in the mind of the Environmental Health Officer. The Environmental Health Officer might be considering, well, it'd be worthwhile having the conditions. I mean, it could be, a sensible precaution to have those conditions in the mind of the Environmental Health Officer. I think it's fair to say, in planning terms, those conditions have to be necessary to make the development acceptable. And I would confirm in this case, well, clearly, excavation is not part of the proposals. There's no basement included in the proposals. So, I mean, I think probably condition 20 ought to stay just to address the Environmental Health Officer's concerns. But maybe the first three aren't strictly necessary.
Okay, thank you. So, colleagues, we need to make a decision. First of all, there's the kind of principle of this building being extended and refurbished rather than implementing a previous permission in which it would be really behind the facade, entirely demolished. I think, to my mind, that probably is desirable from the point of view of local people. I don't know what do you feel about that principle?
Yeah, from my perspective, this is going to be less disruptive and less harmful in terms of materials movement as well. So I think it's good. And I also note the further support letters that have been received to the committee. And I would also agree on the second point, which is conditions 17, 18 and 19 feel not necessary for this development. So I'd be happy to support the application and exclude those 17, 18, 19.
I would support, however, I will keep all recommendations, including SATs, because we have to be prepared for, obviously this application had been assessed by the planning officer and he looked at it from all aspects in regards to new residents, in regards to climate change, and he made sure that this will really be a success in the longer run. I am still not convinced about, because I look so quickly and again I cannot see anything about the fire routes. However, obviously planning officer been in the property, examined that, and he is fully aware that there can be some unpleasant events taking place like fire or flooding. So I would grant it. However, I will keep all the conditions and I would not question the SATs, particularly now in the global warming, because we need to use any green spaces available. And I think now it's a new policy for developer to contribute towards the society by making as green his development as possible. So I would definitely support, but with all the conditions.
Yeah, and I'm fine with SUDs. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So I think we've decided that that the SUDS condition is going to stay in. I think we're on balance. We're prepared to live with that. I would propose that conditions 17, 18 and 19 would be taken out. But condition 20, if something unexpected came up, that would be retained. Okay? So if I can ask, we need to have a formal vote on this. So the recommendation is to grant, subject to the legal agreement and subject, I'm proposing, to removal of conditions 17, 18 and 19. So could I see those in favour of that proposal, please? Those against? Do you wish to abstain? Or? Okay, so that's a vote against. Okay. All right, so that is granted then, as we just discussed. Thank you very much. If we can now move on to the application at 48 Edwards Square, and Mr. Taylor, that's you again.
Yes, it is, Chairman. Thank you. Right, so the, sort of a slight change in physical scale here. That this is an application to replace a previous trellis structure that existed at the first floor terrace, on the side of the first floor terrace, at the side of the property. The first slide there, I think, just essentially it shows the end or the side of the terrace. You can see the gardens to neighbouring properties immediately behind the parapet wall, running along the centre of the photograph. And then sort of on the right-hand side of the parapet wall, you can see that there are old planters sitting on the decking of the terrace. The planters look quite innocuous there, but in fact, when the old trellis was in position along that boundary wall, along the parapet wall, that the planters provided planting that sort of rose up, attached to the trellis, and then down the far side. You can see just the remnants of some of it here. Obviously, at the moment, the old trellis is gone. The terrace just has its decking. It's an open terrace. And as it stands, anybody standing on the terrace could look straight over the parapet down into the neighbours' gardens. What is proposed, essentially, is the erection of a new trellis. I'll use the word trellis, but what's actually proposed is a wire trellis, as opposed to what most of us might imagine as being a trellis in timber. But it has a similar lattice work to a trellis that would obviously act as something for climbers to take hold of. You can see at the centre of the image there, and I've got a larger one coming, but you can see the position of the trellis, and that's the parapet wall that you just saw in the last photograph. And then that's a slightly expanded version. So that's the parapet wall, obviously, at the bottom left, and you can see the proposed new trellis rising above it. And in that image, there are some plants just beginning to grow out of the planters, and they're growing up the trellis. And then in section, that's a section taken through the terrace. And at the left-hand side, you can see the parapet wall that you saw in the photograph. And then there's the proposed trellis attached to the wall immediately behind it. And then the outline there is plants growing up the trellis. So it's recommended for approval on the basis that the character and appearance and special interests of the building would not be harmed by the addition of the trellis. And the trellis itself would obviously provide privacy, not just for users of the terrace, but also for people in the gardens and properties immediately behind. And the recommendation is to approve. Now, you'll have seen, obviously, a lot of discussion about the nature of the trellis. The trellis that is proposed is of a more open variety, perhaps, in terms of its lattice, than some trellises might be. On the other hand, it would still provide purchase for climbers. At the moment, there's condition 3 recommended, which you'll see in your report, which relates to the trellis planting. So there's two things to consider. One is the nature of the trellis itself, and then the nature of the planting. And obviously those two things are interrelated. In the addendum report, you'll see a letter from Christine Hereward on behalf of some of the neighbours. And there's a condition recommended in that letter, which I'd like to commend to the committee as something that I think would be a reasonable condition. I'll just read the condition out in case anyone hasn't had a chance to read it. So the revised condition 3 would be that no later than installation of the trellis or in the first planting season thereafter, to plant both in the ground, i.e. at the base of the side elevation at ground level and in pots on the first floor terrace, plants of an evergreen climbing variety, which is relatively quick growing and long lived, so that the plants grow up and over the trellis and provide effective privacy screening throughout the year. Thereafter, planting shall be retained and maintained, and where it fails or dies, be renewed in accordance with those details. So it's a very detailed planting condition, but I think it is precise, and I think it does serve a planning purpose. There may be a question, which I can't really answer because I haven't investigated it, but there may be a question about the practicality of planting in the ground that perhaps you could address with the parties. But certainly in terms of its terminology, I would suggest that that is a reasonable condition as long as all parts of it can be delivered. And that's the end of the presentation, Chair.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Now we've got, I think, some neighbours, near neighbours registered to speak, and I think you have 3 minutes share between you, and also Councillor Anne Siren is here as well, and a ward councillor can also talk for 2 minutes if they wish themselves. I think in practical terms, if all of you, we say you have up to 5 minutes, and please go ahead, whoever is wanting to start. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Perfect. So, first of all, good evening, and thank you so much for your time in the matter this evening. My name's Sarah Matthews, and I live at number 2 Edwards Place, and this is my neighbour, Tamsin Wollendale, who lives at number 3. And we're speaking on behalf of all the residents of Edward Place who all objected to the proposal. But what I actually want to say to Mr. Taylor is thank you very much for supporting the conditions, because what we're actually here tonight is to ask for those conditions to be put in place. For all the reasons that you have just mentioned. Since the trellis fell down earlier this year and was removed, we've sort of lost all privacy to all the rooms at the back of our house. And just one thing to confirm from what you said earlier is actually it's not just when someone's standing on the terrace that they see into our gardens, bedrooms, bathrooms, every room at the back, but it's actually if they were in the room that is overlooking that terrace as well. And the other thing I think it's hard to see from the photographs is quite how close that is. When you're standing in my kitchen, staring at the people in number 48 in their kitchen, it's so close you almost feel like you should make contact or smile at them because it would be rude if you didn't. So there is really extreme overlooking. So we would be extremely grateful if we could have this condition that would reinstate our privacy. Our concern with the trellis as it stands is that you just really need to have to sort of look at it, which is why we put it in our pack of papers, that it's a very open wire structure that is almost intended to not be there at all, and therefore it's completely see-through, and as it stands doesn't give us any of the privacy that we previously enjoyed. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Answering the question on the practicality of the condition, previously there were plants grown from the garden underneath the property as well as from the planters. So in an ideal world we'd want that to continue, because previously the screen did give us privacy, which clearly is no longer there.
And I just wanted to add that as the ward councillor, I really did want to come and raise the profile of this case, because I've been to visit the neighbours behind 48, and the impact is massive compared to what was there before, and there's literally nothing now. Every single room in the house is overlooked, so it looks like not a very important application, but in fact the impact on our residents has been huge, and I really welcome the tightening up of the condition of the plants, and I think it's for the benefit of number 48 as well. But I really do worry about this trellis, and I mean, I'm not a trellis expert, but you know, we've got to try and help our residents comply with the conditions that we set, and I think it'd be a shame if we approve something that then afterwards ends up in a kind of administrative rabbit hole of enforcement. So actually I would like to ask that the trellis also be considered along with the condition of the plants, because I think this is really easy to fix and it will improve the conditions so much, and I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps if you could put your microphone off as well, please. That's great, thank you. Now, I think we're joined by the agent, Mr. Hastings. Is that right, sir? Good evening. Now, you actually have up to 5 minutes if you need them.
Okay.
But I think we're interested in how you respond to, obviously, the discussion and the comments you've
Yeah,
said.
I think I'll set the speech aside
thank you.
and respond to the raised points,
Yeah,
I think is
thank you.
best. So in terms of the trellis design, we worked with an expert landscaper, a conservation specialist, and a conservation accredited engineer to come up with this proposal. So the wireframe that's suggested is actually the best training possibility for the planting if it's heavy foliage. The reason it's a metallic form is that timber in an external environment will rot and fail in time unless it's maintained. And if we're trying to wrap this entire structure in evergreen foliage, we will never get to the timber to be able to maintain it. Therefore, there's an inevitability that in a few years, the structure will come down again. I mean, we were very lucky when it came down, no one was hurt, no damage was done. I mean, it's worth note that I think this proposal, looking at the way to use metallic features, will be long-lasting. It's conservation-led in the way that it's fixed. I won't bore you with the details, I'm sure you've seen it in the submission, but all of this has been carefully considered to ensure the privacy, because our clients want that privacy as much as the neighbours do. We reduced the height from the existing foliage when our measured survey was done. Initially, it was 3.6 metres, roughly speaking, the vegetation height from the terrace. We've reduced that to 2.6, and the rationale behind that, one is, I think, the height of that overgrown foliage contributed to the fallover of it. And secondly, I think the sun path benefits everybody when it is reduced. Saying that, the 2.6 has been carefully analysed against the window heights of that terrace on the elevation that Derek kindly shared. In terms of width, you could see in the elevation that the final Juliet balcony is viewable. And I understand the commentary from the objectors, but that was viewable before, subject to the angle photographs we're taking. Obviously, the foliage extended and was overgrown, but the trellis never went beyond the terrace parameters. And our trellis won't go beyond that parameter either, otherwise you're bringing a structure cantilevering that can't be done. In terms of the condition, the concern we have really is the planting at the ground floor. The old foliage was growing down from that first floor terrace, and whilst it may be seen as aesthetically pleasing, I don't think it offers any privacy whatsoever, because the boundary and the flank wall are solid brickwork. So I'm not sure what the greenery on top of that really adds. The side passage is under shared ownership, so I'm not sure we should really be planting things there anyway. And in terms of the historic building, if they climb up the brickwork, they eat into the mortar and they degrade it in time. So I do think there's a conservation consideration and a structural implication, hence we're all making this submission as we are. In terms of the evergreen immediate planting upon erection, we understand that and we agree with that. Our clients are as driven as the neighbours to have this privacy returned, but we need to make sure what goes back is long-lasting, considered, and will stand the test of time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, our chance to ask questions of either party. Emma, would you like to go first?
Yes, I would like to ask a question of the agent, if you don't mind. Those residents been there for a very long time. I don't think they moved yesterday. And obviously they have habit of having greenery around them. I understand that storm took something away from them and you have to replace and you have to maintain as a landlord, it's your responsibility. What I am asking from is, have you ever for 1 minute knocked from a door to door and asked, you know what, we're going to replace, what do you going to see? Because you mentioned you go into landscape designers. I haven't got a clue what happened to this. Was the ivy growing? Was that taken with a storm? Somebody cut it down? Was it reasonable to remove it? Or I really don't know, because that's not really saying much what happened to the greenery. Do you know what I mean? Because if the structure itself was timber and was weak and was taken away, obviously I think the first thing will be to contact the residents and take on board what they want. if you said, well, you know what, for a longer run, we don't want to go backwards and do another planning application, we do something solid like metal, at least you should design in the way that any plants growing over that will grow quite quickly. If space is too big, then it takes longer time to do it. So I think you missed something, miscommunication with your residents here.
I understand, and what I would say is the trellis previously wasn't timber. It was a scaffold-like material that had been erected and stuck onto the structure. There's evidence of scarring from it on the historic building, and there's evidence of patch repairs because it was clearly failing prior to my client's ownership. It was never timber at that floor. So I think what we're trying to do, it was metallic, you can see in the photographs. So what we're trying to put back is something that you can see almost the inverted V shape of the scaffold tubes with copulars. We have the engineering reports to confirm that and the fixing locations. During our site visit actually with the conservation engineer, the heritage specialist and myself, one of the gentlemen came out into the garden to speak to us. And we explained at that point verbally, it wasn't an email and I can't prove this, but we spoke verbally and we explained what we were looking to do and the theorem of which to do so. The response we had is anything that creates the mutual privacy we're very supportive of. I believe my clients have tried to reach out as well, and we're not trying to be, you know, objective kind of conversation with neighbours. I work in this borough very often, I understand the importance of it. But I really do believe what's been put forward in the metallic structure. I appreciate the concern of the cabling, but the reason the cabling is proposed is that's what allows an evergreen plant to really clamp to and grow aggressively. So with that condition about those terms of when it would be planted, if you would like the specification of the plant, that could also come through in that condition.
Can I just, excuse me, can I just return to the sort of, well, proposed condition, if you like, in the letter. This issue of planting in the ground, would it be feasible to plant in sort of substantial containers, or is that something that's feasible?
What I'd like to understand is what benefit that ground floor planting to the side gives, because the boundary wall is brick with a timber gate, and the flank wall from that point forward, which is shown in the elevations, is brick. So to me, it's purely an aesthetic preference rather than something that actually creates any privacy whatsoever.
Well, perhaps, no, I take the point you're making, but then aesthetic value, I mean, 48 is actually a listed building. Mm-hmm. This is a very desirable place, a very beautiful place. So, you know, aesthetic considerations, I think, do have their, you know, mm-hmm. they have a part to play, I would suggest. Is there some sort of technical reason why having some kind of creeper that came from planting of some sort at ground floor up the flank wall? As you say, it's just a brick side elevation. Is there some technical reason why that's not possible?
There was a concern raised by the conservation engineer, because anything that creeps and grows onto a building, especially the evergreens, they find their way into the mortar beds, and obviously the bricks are associated with the listing of the building. Mortar, you can argue, you can repoint, we won't go down that road, but there's, you know, I appreciate that it's grade 2 listed, and the significance of this property has been at the key of this proposal, but I'm not sure introducing climbing plants on a sheer brick wall is a benefit to the building and the proposal, because I do fear it will eat into the bricks. It always happens. You can see it in the terrace that was there at the moment because it was growing around it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Colleagues, anything else? No. Oh, okay, go on.
I think it just matter to introduce plants which will grow faster and really give privacy to residents. If, for instance, we will approve the structure as it is, you need to put some kind of mesh to make it sure that planting is growing. Mm-hmm. So I think about SATs, I think about planters. I know it's listed. If you put a good solid planter, and introduce, you mentioned you are not happy with ivy, and I think you haven't done your research, because when you look into Boston ivy, it doesn't really go into the brick wall. So I think your project was, let's get crack with it, because it's an issue here, but you haven't really taken on board what could really work, and you wouldn't be here. Because, for instance, if you had this project and you would send in a letter or emails to your residents, can you comment on it, give 2 weeks time deadline, then you can work up something with them. You honestly jump into it yourself. I get it that. I'm more or less happy with the structure. However, I would like to see a proper solid planter with a well-established plants and with good understanding between your residents that those planters have good quality plants climbing, like Boston ivy. You research and you agree with your residents what they want to see to make sure that privacy is maintained, because this is what they used to.
Yeah, the first time that I heard from the case officer that was concerns over that was pretty much my exact suggestion, that there's a condition applied about the landscaping, let's call it, that will give the specification of the planters, the plants that will climb, and the reason behind them as well. So we're absolutely on board with that.
Just to add to it, we're not talking about little pots. We're talking about proper solid planters you see somewhere, which are quite proper box to maintain itself, and you organize in the way that they always have moisture, so whatever climbs up, it's always is there.
Yes, I understand. I think the wood in that landscaping proposal, obviously there's a root network that needs considered, the soil heights, there's quite a lot around the planter itself, which again we'd very much welcome dealing with under the condition.
Is it possible for me to just respond? Only because, sorry.
Yes, just briefly.
Very
Okay, I think it's
just
fair
because
enough that you
having lived
respond
there,
quickly.
I can tell you that it was a form of ivy that had been actually up there for 20 years. We've all lived there for 20 years, and that ivy had been there for 20 years. So I think if you're looking for something long-lasting, considered, that can be well maintained, we've already know what that is. The reason it fell down was it hadn't been maintained. The previous owners had it pruned every year to keep it in place, and it had fallen into disrepair, hence it fell down. But the reason why we've suggested it's planted in the ground is because the passageway, which actually is in our ownership, is a soil base. Therefore, plants can actually get their roots down into the soil, rather than planters, which we appreciate are actually very difficult to maintain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No. Okay, in that case, it's our turn to ask Mr. Taylor and officers about this. Who'd like to go first? Maybe. Okay, I'll lead off. It seems to me that I think we probably, Mr. Taylor, we've got a lot of sympathy with the neighbours, and I think the principle of substantial planting is something that I suspect we all support. The proposed condition, we could simply adopt it as it is written, although we've heard that the applicant isn't really happy about planting in the ground. We could put in, I suppose we could amend it so that it was to plant in the ground or in pots, and it would, that would add a degree of flexibility. Or we could accept that the principle of planting on the flank wall is something that might well be desirable, but it's not really within the planning system to say that it is necessary. Can you help us a bit on these kind of points? Where do you think we are on this?
I think that's a very good summary, actually. I think taking the third part of it first, obviously one of the requirements for a planning condition, as set out very clearly in the national tests for all planning conditions, is that a planning condition has to be necessary. Has to be necessary to serve a planning purpose. And I think there are two potential purposes here in terms of the necessity of a condition. The first one is privacy, and then the second one might be visual amenity. In terms of privacy, obviously planting is only necessary up on the terrace level. I think as the architect has explained, planting at the lower level can have no benefit in terms of privacy. it may have an aesthetic benefit, but not in terms of privacy. So if the planning objective, if the planning necessity is privacy, then the lower level planting would seem to serve very little purpose, or in fact no purpose. It would only serve a purpose at such time as the creepers reach the terrace level. So I think in terms of necessity, if privacy is the objective, then the ground level planting wouldn't seem to be necessary, even if it may be advantageous in some way. I do have a concern, though, which I think only became apparent during this discussion, which is that if the ground that the planting would be in is under shared ownership, then arguably it's not entirely within the applicant's ability to comply with that condition. I mean, for as long as the owners of the land allowed the applicant to plant things in that ground, then they could comply with the condition. But for some reason, a future owner might say, well, I don't really want the applicant going in and maintaining plants in the shared ground. And I think the fact that it's shared ownership at ground level does give me a bit of concern in terms of the long-term deliverability of the condition. Normally, for a condition, it should be entirely within the applicant's control to comply with that condition. So that's just, I'm throwing a spanner in the works, I'm afraid, on the ground. But I do have that concern if the ground is not entirely within the applicant's control. I don't know if our solicitor would want to add anything to that. But,
Can I clarify that point? Could I possibly clarify that point about the legal?
Please, you go ahead.
No, I was going to raise the same point about when I heard Sarah Matthews say that the passageway, the ground at the base of the wall was in your ownership. Because obviously we can't impose a condition on someone where it's not entirely in their control to deliver it. It is an issue. It might be something that's best dealt with as an informative, maybe sort of liaise with residents as to possibly have some planting from the ground floor, but not actually include it in the condition. It shouldn't be in the condition if it's not entirely within the applicant's control.
Could I possibly clarify that? They have a ground floor garden which is in their ownership, which previously was used for growing the plants. The passageway is shared.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, the kind of discussion has moved on, I'm afraid, so we can't go back and forth, unfortunately. So, colleagues, what are our thoughts here? Sam, do you want to?
Yeah, I thought this is a useful discussion, because even though these are quite fine points, they've got to be got right. And I hear what my officers are saying. I don't think we can. The point is to screen, but we can't force something that is unreasonable on the applicant, and therefore maybe the informative is the right place to deal with the encouragement of ground-based planting, but the condition itself should be based around the screening, which is the main part of the application. As far as the structure is concerned, I'm taking what I've heard about the advice that this is the best way in which something can grow and be maintained. This is a relatively open structure at the start. I have no reason to disagree with that.
Yes, I think I agree with that. I think what we should probably do is that. Do you want to add something just before I?
Yes, I just would like to add, because the lady clarified, the passage, it's a communal, but whenever the plants are growing, it belongs to the ownership. So there is no issue whatsoever to ask the agent to grow exactly what was there before. That's correct? So since we're here, I think it's right thing not to create any more animosities between residents and the agent. I am sure he doesn't want to be here anymore, the same like us, spending time on some small things. We establish that the passage is a communal and the ground belongs to the landlord, who is the agent, and he can grow from the ground whatever was there before. So if it was the ivory before, and he's concerned about the ivory going into the brick wall, he can introduce Boston ivory or research any kind of glamping plant which will more than less provide the same privacy. With time, obviously, residents have to bear in mind this doesn't grow overnight. However, sooner or later they will get into what they used to. So I would approve the structure as it is, with condition that we grow exactly from a grant what it was, and he maintain and nurture until the plants get to the point where they were used to be before the storm. So I think it's reasonable to grant it.
Okay, so you're saying we should grant it with the proposed condition, which includes from the ground floor. I think my own feeling on this, and we need to make a decision about this. I think the planting that creates the screening at first floor level, I think that's completely clear cut. I think everybody's in favour of that. I think following officer advice, I think it may be that adding an informative, which officers would have to draft, that said we think that ground floor planting of some kind would be extremely desirable. Now, whether that's actually in the ground or it's from pots, I'm not sure really. We as a planning committee, we're not really in a position to say and to enforce something like that. That would be my own thought. Katie, does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think an informative is the appropriate way to make the intentions of the committee clear, that that's what you would expect to happen. We could also put in that informative that we'd expect the applicant to liaise with the residents in question as well, and hopefully a mutual solution can be found that way.
I mean, I think that's probably clearly the planning system constrains us and the kind of things that we can consider and the decisions we can make. So what I would like to do, if I may, colleagues, is I would propose, first of all, there's a planning application and then listed building consent. I'd like to propose that the planning permission is granted, but with a new condition 3, which only refers to the trellis and the need for planting at first floor level, but we add an informative which makes clear essentially the discussion we've had, that we would encourage the parties to seek agreement among themselves for some planting at ground floor level, which I think would add to the local amenity, and it's something that would need to be worked out between the parties. So I would like to propose that we grant on that basis. Colleagues, can I see those in favour of granting on that basis? So that is granted. Thank you very much. We can now move on to the listed building consent. And I think that is essentially in the same form, Mr. Taylor, isn't it? So that's completely straightforward. The proposal is that we grant listed building consent. Can I see those in favour of that, please? So that's granted as well. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. If we can now move on to the South Pack, excuse me, and the application at Pier House, and I think Aaron Lau, you're going to do this, aren't you? So Aaron, when you're ready, please.
Evening, Chairman, members. This is agenda item number SO70 in the agenda pack. The application itself is for the removal of 2 number of windows to the rear elevation of the subject building. Also, at the same time, the lowering of the sill to floor level and the replacement of 2 number of bifolding doors and glass Juliet balconies at the car showroom, which is located on the ground floor at Pier House 31 Shane Walk, which is also located at Road Junction with Chelsea Embankment and Oakley Street. This slide basically shows you the site in question. On the left-hand side, you have a mixed-use development comprising of the car showroom, which is located on the ground floor of the property. There are a number of residential units that occupy the same block in question as well. The building is not listed, but it is located within the chain conservation area. There are several listed buildings to the west of the site, which you can see here, as well as to the east. Those are Grade 2 listed buildings. On the right-hand image, this is area view of the back of the property. The two windows are located on the ground floor, to which they are indicated by the two red arrows, and those are the windows to be replaced and enlarged. Moving on to the existing photos, on the left image here, as outlined in red, those are the two ground floor car showroom windows to be replaced. They currently form part of the car showroom offices and conference rooms, so two separate ancillary rooms to the showroom. Other views of the windows in this particular image, as you can see, it spans the entire brickwork, currently constructed out of aluminium frame. The image on the right-hand side, that's actually a view from inside of one of those rooms, looking out into the service yard, as well as communal private gardens that is offered to the residents of the flatted development. Just moving on to the existing proposed elevations. On the left-hand side, you can clearly see the windows be replaced on the ground floor level. On the right-hand side, the proposed elevations, what you can see is the brickwork of the existing windows. They will be removed and also at the same time lowered to create these new bifold doors. Within each pair of the new window openings, there will be Juliet balconies, but obviously they'll be finished flush with the rear elevation. The replacement doors themselves would match the existing window openings and therefore maintain the architectural rhythm of the building. The aluminium frame windows, in terms of materiality, a matching condition number 3, has been recommended to ensure that obviously it results in an in-keeping form of development. Due to the lack of visibility, because of the siting of the development to the rear of the property, it's not going to be visible from any public views, and the minor works themselves, they would not actually cause any harm to the significance of the conservation area or the listed buildings that are located in the vicinity. Turning to the amenity impact itself, again, given the minor nature of the works proposed, the existing openings, although it's appreciated the openings would be slightly enlarged vertically, officers do not consider the proposals would per se give rise to any significant loss of living conditions to the adjoining residential properties, especially those that surround it, including those ones that cited directly above that. Any overlooking effects would be comparable to existing levels. And finally, the showroom would only be occupied during business hours as well. And in conclusion, officers therefore recommend the application for approval subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. No speakers have registered for this. Any questions at all? No? I think this is quite a prominent building, but the proposal is really round the back of it, so it's quite inconspicuous, I think, isn't it? So no, I think that's well understood. Eva, please.
There is one concern from someone who objects. It's a gentleman living in flat 6. His concern is that when you do your proposal, it will become more into commercial building than actually residential, and he's making, I think, quite valid point, because would just comment on it. what would you respond to this gentleman if you were here, more than less I am making this question on his behalf since he's not here?
Sorry, the question or the concern you're raising is the fact that what this would result in would make it more commercial, is that correct? I mean, what I can say to that is the building on the ground floor does comprise of an existing car showroom, so there is an element of commercial activity that does occur at the ground floor. It's not a residential use, so therefore the existing use will be retained as a result of this proposal. All this proposal seeks to do is make some external fenestration details to improve the, I guess, the quality of the office environment that houses the two connecting rooms that serves these two openings, and to the benefit of the car showroom offices. So I would say I would disagree with that point in terms of turning the building into more of a commercial building. It is backing onto a rear service yard, notwithstanding obviously it overlooks a residential open garden, but if you can see from this rear elevation the existing configuration and fenestration pattern of the ground floor windows are much larger, and that suggests that it's a departure of what happens above, which is more residential in nature. So that's in keeping with the general use of the planning unit itself.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
Just wanted to ask something, because it's the same objection, and obviously gentleman is not here, and I think maybe somewhere reason that he didn't turn up. He has a very valid point here about lack of privacy with time, and there's another objector saying loss of privacy, noise pollution, harm and loss of original fabric. Obviously you have no smoking policy on your premises, so does it include going on the balconies and smoking on the balconies? Because if some people live there, obviously you have windows, you don't smoke through the window, but if you have balconies, you overlook somebody's garden, and I think it's a valid point here that privacy will be lost. And obviously I have my own concern about size of windows that are not matching existing ones.
I can't speak on behalf of the applicants because they're not present at this committee. In terms of smokers gathering at that particular window, I mean, clearly these two windows do not form part of a smoking shelter. They form part of a showroom office as well as a conference room. I don't believe it's legal to smoke within an environment, within a building of this nature. There would have to be designated external space which allows smokers to smoke. I guess if there's a smoker of the car showroom, they'll possibly exit from the front of the building, because there's plenty of space directly in front of the buildings which allows smokers to smoke and take continuous breaks throughout the day. So I can't agree to the fact that it would lead to smokers gathering by the window and also resulting in smoke pollution to the nearby units. So that's my personal point of view.
No, I think given the nature of what is proposed, I think the impacts on neighbours, frankly, would be very modest, really. I think perhaps we can make a decision about this. The recommendation is to grant with the conditions that are attached. Can I see those in favour, please? Granted. Those against?
I'm not convinced about the balcony.
Okay, so that's 2-1. Okay, so that's granted. Thank you. If we can now move on to the application at 12 and 14 Ovington Square, please. Aaron, that's you again, I think.
This is agenda number SO71 in the agenda pack. Chairman, members should be reminded there's addendum for this item regarding amendments to several paragraphs contained within the report and the amendment to conditions number 5 and 6 as set out in the note. This application address is for the two separate adjoining properties, terrace properties at number 12 and 14 Overton Square. Full planning permission is sought for the reconfiguration of these two adjoining properties to create 6 number of residential flats on the site, which will result in an uplift of 2 units, rear and roof extensions, and also at the same time front elevational works. Moving on to some area views of the site in questions. This is a pair of properties as outlined in red and as shown in the images on the left and right. You got an indication of the front of the properties in the left image. The properties are not listed, but they do fall within the Furlough Estate and Smith Charity Conservation Area. There are Grade 2 listed buildings located, however, on the other side of Overton Square itself. And it's also worth noting, especially as shown in this rear image, that both properties adjoining have been heavily altered in the past, including ground floor extensions, which more or less occupies the entire back gardens of these two properties. And at the same time, these, you would argue, unsympathetic outrigger extensions that have been constructed at some point in the past. Moving on to some existing photos. As you can see, the property at number 12 is in a poor state of repair, and this is supported by structural reports provided with the application itself. And this application seeks to bring this particular building back into gainful use, which officers support. The rear image, which you can see, further emphasizes the poor ad hoc extensions that have been added to these two adjoining properties, including you can clearly see this breeze block closet wing attached to the rear of number 12. Clearly and currently, these are considered to be harmful to the setting of the conservation area, and therefore their removal is therefore supported. Moving on to the existing and proposed elevation of the proposal itself. Both elevations, as shown on the the right-hand image, will be refurbished with timber replacements, and the cornice detail, which is this top detail of the roof here, of the parapet, that cornice detailing will be repaired at number 12 to be in keeping with the remaining terrace. A roof extension is also proposed across both properties. They have been purposely designed to match the existing examples which can be found within the street, and therefore they will be in keeping. There are dormer windows that are proposed, a pair of them to the front roof slope. Again, they've been sensitively designed, not only in terms of the overall portions, but in alignment to the windows that sit directly below them. Turning to the existing and proposed elevations, in terms of the development to the rear, the haphazard assortment of extensions, as previously described, will be replaced with lower and ground floor extensions and more traditional closet-style wing properties, which would be more sympathetic to the style of these properties. These extensions themselves are considered a significant improvement to what's currently in situ, and therefore they are wholly supported by officers. Conditions have been recommended as part of this pack, including matching materials and window details, and those are set out under conditions number 5 and 7, and to be recommended be attached for any approval. Finally, moving to the existing and proposed section here, what is worth noting is on the right-hand image of where the proposed section or the proposed amount for the lower ground floor extension, you can clearly see that it's actually shorter in depth compared to what's currently on site, which more or less occupies the majority of the garden space. As such, it's going to maintain the living conditions of the neighbouring properties that are located at either side of the planning site. The new 1.8 metre deep closet wing would not cause any significant impact upon the living conditions, either to the upper floor windows. In terms of parking for the proposals, 4 out the units would be secured by legal agreement to be permit-free, meaning that those occupiers will not be able to obtain parking permits and therefore add to any parking pressures within the locality of the area. All the units would meet the minimum space standards. They'll also benefit from adequate outlook and daylight. The new units themselves would also contribute to the council's housing stock and the housing stock in London in general. And the site overall has been optimised to secure a maximum number of units it can deliver. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and the completion of the legal agreements as set out in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Questions? Anyone? Sam?
I think on balance it feels well thought out, and I couldn't think of any other ways in which the harm that objectors are talking about could be mitigated, because building is going to be a bit disruptive, but the outcome will be beneficial to the whole area.
Yes, I mean, I think I generally agree with that observation. Do you have any questions, or do you want to?
I just would like to sort of look through the objectors, and I think they have valid point that it's really overusing that property, and people who live there, they made very clear that it's just one entry. There will be trouble in regards to rubbish. There will be more, maybe antisocial behavior, more issues which were not really there since this development. I can understand that we are short of housing stock. However, I think we shouldn't be abusing listed building or building in a conservation area and push it further. I would rather be inclined to refuse that.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think for my part, I think it sounds as though one of the buildings is really in quite a poor state and may not really be properly occupied at the moment. Is that correct? Yeah. No, I think to my mind, bringing these buildings back into use and the various proposals, I think, will make a considerable improvement to the area. One question I do have, actually, the issue of bicycles, because I think people have raised, you know, they don't, somebody said, we don't want masses of bicycles, you know, attached to our railings, but that's not really a planning matter, is it? That's outside our scope, yeah?
What I can say to that is the applicant has provided a dedicated cycle storage within the front vaults of the 2 properties. 15 number of cycle spaces are expected for the number of occupants based on the level of units being proposed. That's in line with the local and the London Plan cycle standards. It's generally accepted in terms of its location, because obviously it's secure, and it's covered, and therefore it provides direct access to future occupiers in bringing and storing their bicycles in the front vaults. Because we don't have specific details, although the location has been identified within this mission, there is a condition number 12, that have been proposed to ensure that obviously full details shall be provided to the local planning authority to ensure that it meets the relevant standards and that officers are satisfied with that arrangement before obviously the development is occupied.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. So colleagues, recommendations to grant. with the conditions attached, and also, of course, the legal agreement which secures the permit free for the couple of additional units created. Can I see those in favour, please, of granting? Those against? Okay, so that's two votes to 1. So that's granted. Thank you very much indeed. So if we can now move on to Pullman Court, and I think Melissa Vingo Wright, I think, Melissa, you're going to present this, aren't you? Yeah? Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So the application flat is situated on the 6th and 7th floors of Pullman Court, which is on the east side of Drayton Gardens. The location for the air conditioning units is on the rear terrace of the 6th floor, which is shown with the arrow. This photo shows the location closer up. There is an existing unit in place, which is shown in the bottom right-hand corner of this photo. And this unit was previously turned off due to noise concerns, but is still in place at the moment. The application is for an additional air conditioning unit, as well as an acoustic enclosure which will cover both the new unit and the existing unit. The information submitted as part of the application, including an acoustic report, has been assessed by our environmental health colleagues, and they've confirmed that the use of the acoustic enclosure with the additional unit is acceptable, and the running of both units with the acoustic enclosure would be compliant with the noise SPD and policy CE6. The conditions have been proposed to ensure that the running of both units would continue to be acceptable within our requirements. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you very much. Questions? Maybe I'll start. If I've understood this right, there's an existing unit there, yes? So by having this planning permission, potentially there's a new unit, but there's also, planning permission would also give the ability to control an existing unit as well. Is that right? That's the heart of the matter, yes?
Yes, that's correct. So the existing unit, there's no planning history for, and we have no certainty when this unit was actually put in place, but the conditions proposed include control of both the existing unit and the proposed unit.
Good, thank you. Any questions about this? I think it seems quite straightforward, really. So the recommendation is to grant, obviously with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. If we can now return to the North Pack and go to the application at 21 Calfield Gardens, please. Now it's back to Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Right, so this is an application for a basement, a single-storey basement beneath the property, as well as a rear extension and a dormer window to be slotted into the rear roof slope. The first slide I'm showing you there shows a section through the existing building. And as usual, when you see stuff in red, I mean, everything in red is fabric to be removed from the building. So you can see there that would be quite an extensive internal rearrangement. But that, of course, is actually outside planning control. Planning permission isn't required to rearrange the interior of the property. The proposed section is there, so that's the existing and then that's the proposed. The two things to point out there, I think, firstly, up at roof level, as you can see in the section, there's now a dormer window slotted into the rear slope. And then secondly, at basement level, there is now a single-storey basement. There would be a light well at the front, where my cursor is right at the bottom left, and that would let light down and air down to the front of it. And then the rear of the basement just comes out slightly under the garden. And where it comes out, there'd be a mixture of soil as required by policy. It's a single-storey basement, and it complies with all the criteria of policy CL7. That's the existing rear elevation, the property identified between the two blue arrows. You can see there the neighbouring property actually has a dormer window in its roof at the rear already. And that's the proposal. So now you can see the elevation of the dormer window. And then there's the infill side extension that you can see to the left-hand side of the property running up to the boundary wall. And that's the proposed site elevation. And that's the last slide. Oh, actually, sorry. Oh. I had one more, which was the proposed basement floor plan that just shows the arrangement of the basement. Nothing too surprising there.
Thank you. Any questions about this? It seems to me this really is it's consistent with neighbouring properties, and it complies with the development plan, essentially.
Yes, I'd describe it as a policy-compliant basement, and the other alterations also comply with development plan policies.
Yeah. Any questions?
I looked through it quite a long time, and I took on board everything was being said by the objectors. And I think sitting on a flooding and management working group and dealing with floods and SATs, and it's very clear stated here, it is in North Kensington critical drainage area. There are reports saying that this kind of development, digging basements, really increase the flooding risk to the neighbor properties. We allowed so many basement developments. This applicant is asking to elevate the garden as well. I would strongly object, because our policy on developing basement has changed due to 2021 July 12 flooding. There are many concerns well-based, and residents have all rights to be concerned. There are many little things here which are not provided, and I think this is not fully presented case, because, for instance, there are no reports which should be included. So I think this is not really fully documented application to see it from all angles possible, particularly when this is on a flooding, highly flooding risk area. There are reports, and I think we need to be really aware that this digging into basement went really too far, and I would strongly object it.
Well, no, I wasn't sure if that was a question or a statement. I'm sorry, but I mean, I can respond to what you were saying. I mean, essentially, the task of the planning authority in the first instance is to ensure that a development complies with the policies of the development plan. And policy CL7 in the local plan 2019 is the most relevant policy. The matters that I think that you are drawing concern at there in terms of flooding were addressed in the development of the policy. When the basement policy first came in, Alan Baxter Associates carried out an extensive survey of the borough and analysed all the available evidence. And they actually concluded that the digging of a basement in itself wouldn't increase flood risk. Flood risk has definitely increased over the years because of the building over of land, creating hard surfaces, impermeable surfaces, and so on. has certainly increased flood risk, but the evidence actually relating to basements and flood risk simply wasn't there. Now, there may be further policies, there may be further studies, but at the moment we have the Development Plan Policy CL7, and this basement proposed here would comply with that policy. So policy can obviously take different directions in the future, and maybe it needs to, but those are discussions obviously that have to be played out. But at the moment, it's the policies of the current development plan that sort of come to bear here. But what I would say is that the current development plan in policy CE2 actually has come a long way in comparison with previous development plans, and the requirements now for flood risk and for SUDs, which you see embodied in the conditions here, do go further than any that have gone before. So the current development plan has actually progressed a long way in terms of flood risk and in terms of reducing the amount of runoff from properties.
So what SADs would you suggest to be implemented?
Well, I mean, one of the conditions here requires a surface water drainage strategy, a SUD strategy, and that would secure the reduction in runoff from the property into other land or into the drains. That's the whole purpose of that condition. And I think, as I mentioned earlier this evening, it's actually quite a progressive condition. I mean, reducing the amount of runoff from land by 50% is something that can't always be attained. And it's a far-reaching condition, that one.
But this gentleman, he's digging 3 meters into the ground.
Yes, I mean, that's obviously part of the proposal.
And obviously it says here the report indicates groundwater was encountered during drilling, which means Royal Kensington and Chelsea should decline permission based on the specific results of a completed site test. So since site is within the critical drainage area and there are a number of overbasements already permitted, Council should refuse. From what we've been gathering for the flooding working group, many residents have been really affected exactly by drastic developments of basements, and there are reports that they will suffer because some of them have no money to really protect their own property. There are really cases of people complaining of dumps, and I don't think this is going really in the right direction, particularly in a global warming, to allow someone to dig into their water grounds, being on this flooding risk area already, critical drainage area. It's really unreasonable for me to do it.
Okay, I think the condition 12, which is in the report, I think that probably represents as far as we're able to go at the moment within the planning policies. I mean, it's quite a detailed condition, and I think that, as Mr. Taylor says, the basement policy was formulated, it's a few years ago now, but there was actually a great deal of work and research done in order to formulate the policy, and that does form part of the development plan. Now, obviously, in the future, the development plan might be changed, and that's something that people would be free to propose. But for the moment, I think these conditions probably do represent where we can sensibly go with this.
If I can just clarify it in regards to point 12, as you mentioned, it says very clear here, no development should commence until the following additional surface water drainage information is submitted. We don't have this information. As I said, this application is very quickly rushed, doesn't take into consideration neighbors and doesn't take into consideration exactly the conditions. They are not fulfilled. We have no documents which we will ask about, and it says very clear, no development should commence. So we cannot allow the application development without having exactly what we are asking in point 12.
Mr. Taylor, perhaps you could, if my reading of this is right, this is a pre-commencement condition, is that right?
That's correct. So in other words, that the applicant can't start digging their basement lawfully until they've discharged the requirements of that condition. so that there are often detailed matters with a planning application that are considered important enough to set aside by pre-commencement condition. But applicants often don't know all that detail when they're applying for planning permission. So in this case, those details would have to be submitted before they could lawfully implement their development.
Okay, so I think we need to make a decision. So the recommendation is to grant permission, but with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour, please? Those against? Okay, so that's granted by 2 votes to 1. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. If we can now move to the application relating to Dixon House. Mr. Taylor, that's back to you again, isn't it?
Microphone on. So you'll obviously have seen from the reports that there are 4 sort of quite similar applications relating to Dixon House, Markland House, Whitstable House and Frinstead House. I mean, I'll take them one by one because obviously each one stands alone as a planning application. I'll just show you a couple of slides for each. So Dixon House is the first one. And you'll see there basically images or two of the 4 faces of Dixon House. And you can see up at roof level the proposed railings shown in blue, and then down at ground floor level you can see that there are new louvers fitted to the flank of the building that you can see in blue at the lower level. To zoom in a little bit, those are the roof safety railings at roof level. You can see essentially that the railings are fitted at 2 levels, the 21st floor and the 22nd floor levels. The 21st floor has a rail running along there, and then the 22nd floor level has the railing running at the upper level. And then just to zoom in at ground floor level, you can see there the proposed louvers where new plant would be installed within the building. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I think just to mention, this is coming to the committee because it's our own property, so it's necessary for it to come to committee. Any questions about this? Or can we just move straight to the vote? Okay, so the recommendation is to grant. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you.
Okay, and then moving on to Markland House. I'll go through them slightly more quickly because they look pretty much the same. So you can see there 2 of the elevations of Markland House as proposed, and then at roof level zooming in. You can see there it looks as if the railings are slightly wonky. That's because the roof actually has a slight curve to it. So it is drawn correctly. And then at basement level, those are the 2 louvers that you can see towards the left of the image.
Okay. Any questions about that one? Essentially, it seems a very similar type of proposal. Can I see those in favour of granting permission, please? So that is granted. Thank you.
And then moving on to Whitstable House, very similar. So you can see there the louvers at the lower level and the roof railings proposed at the top level at floors 21 and 22 level. And that's a blow up of the roof railings. And then the louvers again at the lower level.
Okay. Any questions about that one? No. Okay, in that case, we can take a vote. So the recommendation is to grant. I see those in favour, please. Yes, that's right. Okay, so that's granted. Thank you.
And then finally, Frinstead House. In this case, it's only proposed to put railings up at the roof level. They're not inserting new plants or louvers at the lower level in this case. So those are 2 of the flanks of the building with the railings shown at roof level. And again, there's the railing in a larger image, and that's the last slide.
Thank you. Any questions on that one? No. In that case, if we can move to a vote, those in favour of granting permission, please. So that's granted. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.